On the first day of school, he came to class wearing a suit and was mocked by the bully for looking like a substitute teacher. This gave Frank an idea, so he wrote his own name on the blackboard and shouted loudly. The whole class believed it was true and obediently sat down. Frank even successfully punished the bully. His powerful presence silenced everyone, even the actual substitute teacher was fooled.
I always sub for Roberta. Excuse me, why aren't you reading?
By the time the school discovered Frank, he had already been teaching the students for a whole week. Not only did he teach them, but he also assigned homework and even held a parent-teacher conference. He even planned a field trip to a bakery for the entire class. His mother was extremely disappointed in Frank, while his father had a different reaction. After all, that is running in the blood. His father was a successful person but engaged in tax evasion and was on the verge of bankruptcy due to the financial crisis. To secure a bank loan, his father rented a luxury car and bought Frank a suit so that he could pose as a chauffeur. Frank couldn't understand why his father did this, and his father told him, "Do you know why the New York Yankees always win? It's because people can't take their eyes off their pinstripe uniforms." With his father's grand entrance, the bank manager personally received him. However, due to his tax evasion, the bank was unwilling to take the risk and refused to grant him the loan. Thus, Frank's family had to declare bankruptcy, sell their mansion, and move into a small, rundown apartment. On Frank's 16th birthday, his father gave him a bank account with $25 and an empty checkbook, telling him that will follow him for his whole life. Little did his father know that Frank would later use the check to fool everyone. One day, as Frank returned home as usual, he found a stranger walking out of his mother's room. He knew what had happened and sat silently on the couch. His mother was afraid that Frank would tell his father, so she tried to bribe him with money. However, a few days later, when Frank returned home again, his mother and father were already going through the divorce proceedings. They asked Frank to decide who he would live with in the future. Unable to accept the reality of his parents' divorce and not wanting to decide who to live with, Frank ran away from home and bought a train ticket with the check. From then on, he started living on his own. At night, he tried to use the check to pay for a hotel room, but the owner kicked him out since he had limited funds and no money. He then thought of going to the bank to exchange the check for some cash. He clumsily changed the date on the check and pasted someone else's name on it. However, his unskilled technique resulted in him trying out different identities and banks, but all in vain. Feeling frustrated, he suddenly noticed a group of pilots passing by, and their glamorous appearance made him envious. Frank couldn't afford to study at flight school, so he disguised himself as a journalist and successfully entered an aviation company to learn about flying under the guise of an interview. He even obtained an expired license from a high-ranking executive in the company. With this expired license, he acquired a uniform and removed a logo from the company's airplane model to forge his own checks. With the uniform on, he had a completely different persona and attracted everyone's attention. He confidently went to the bank to exchange the checks, even flirting with the bank employee. Succeeding in his endeavors, Frank became unstoppable. He filled the bathtub with model planes to remove the labels from them and had several modified checks lying on the floor. From then on, Frank gradually immersed himself in the identity of a pilot, enjoying free flights to various destinations. His calm and composed demeanor made him fit seamlessly into the role. During his first flight, he experienced a sense of exhilaration like never before, but quickly adapted. He even used the skills he learned from his father to hit on an attractive flight attendant. To create more authentic checks, he invested in a second-hand check printing machine. However, no crime can be hidden forever. The FBI noticed someone exploiting loopholes across the country to cash fake checks. In less than a year, Frank had accumulated a large amount of money and even bought his father a brand new Cadillac. However, his father, fearing an investigation, refused Frank's gift. But what Frank didn't expect was that an FBI agent named Carl had been following his trail. Carl accidentally discovered that Frank was still residing at a hotel while searching for evidence related to the forged checks. He went to Frank's hotel room, but there was nobody inside except ink and paper. Suddenly, Frank walked out of the bathroom normally, surprising Carl. Frank claimed to be from another bureau that he and his partner had already arrested the fraudster. He pulled back the curtains and coincidentally his neighbor was passing by.
Hey Murph, yeah, call the LAPD again. I don't want people walking through my crime scene.
Frank handed his wallet to Carl, claiming that his identification was inside and asked him to inspect it. This elaborate act convinced Carl, allowing Frank to leave while Carl remained to protect the scene. Carl, feeling relieved, sat on the bed, thinking that this investigation had been surprisingly easy. He casually opened Frank's wallet only to find various forged labels inside. It finally dawned on him that he had been tricked. When he pulled back the curtains, Frank had already escaped. Carl, furious, threw the wallet away. Newspapers were publishing stories about this. Airbond 007 and the airport executive was frustrated. But little did he know that the man in front of them was none other than the Airbond himself. Frank, too, came to admire James Bond and started dressing like him. On Christmas Eve of the year, Carl received a phone call from Frank. Frank apologized for his previous actions and explained his future plans. However, Carl realized that Frank's phone call was not just an apology, it was because he was lonely. Even on Christmas Eve, Frank had nobody to talk to. Frank hurriedly hung up the phone, and Carl felt as if he had won a battle. He started the investigation by tracing those who had run away from home, finally finding Frank's mother. After visiting her, he confirmed that Airbond was indeed Frank. However, Frank's mother was still unaware of the trouble her son had caused and wanted to use a check to solve the problem. When the agent told her how much his son had stolen, she was shocked.
So far, it's about $1.3 million.
Meanwhile, Frank visited a friend at the hospital and unexpectedly met Brenda. Frank was highly interested in her, so he had a new identity.
I'm a doctor.
He cut out a Harvard emblem from a book and skillfully forged a Harvard Medical School graduation certificate. He successfully applied for a position as a chief physician, and among the 20 nurses he managed was Brenda. As for medical skills, he could only learn from movies. One day, a man with a broken leg arrived at the hospital, and Frank had no idea how to handle the situation. Fortunately, he had two of his doctors by his side. Under the pretense of testing them, he successfully made one of the doctors suggest a solution. While the doctor, who was unresponsive earlier, regretted not seizing the opportunity to showcase his skills, Frank was in the bathroom vomiting uncontrollably. It seemed that the path of being a doctor was not going to last long for him. However, luckily, his relationship with Brenda continued to grow closer.